Welcome to our service dog handler chat for February. It's hard to believe this is our third year of hosting these service dog handler chats already. All the previous ones are available on our Crazy to Calm YouTube channel. If you haven't seen them, there's lots of great information there. Today I'm really excited. I hope other people are as well, but I'm excited to do a chat focused on looking at the behaviors we want from our dog. And we have a special guest, Matt Beisner, here today. You may recognize his face if you're a fan of either the Disney Channel or lots of things on Facebook. I've been extremely impressed with the things I've seen under his Do Dog Life Differently campaign, which is his new one. So I'll let him tell us a little bit about that. And so we welcome you, Matt. Thanks for joining us. And we know you're going to add some great value to our chat as we talk about the behaviors we want our dogs to do. Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Penny, so much. It was great to talk with you the first time we met. And thanks for this opportunity. Thank you to the group for making space for me to sit in. My name is Matt Beisner. I'm a certified professional dog trainer. I'm licensed as a family dog mediator in training. And I was afraid of dogs until about 16 years ago. I got bit when I was a kid. I shepherd on Halloween. In hindsight, I could say definitely not the shepherd's fault. The behavior was 100% appropriate based on that shepherd's experience in that moment. And I would even go so far as to say not the fault of the adults. Their responsibility, yes, but not their fault, because they were operating from where they were at that time. If you hear my dog whining, it's because my mother-in-law just arrived and my dog adores her. So I'm going to let her out so that there's not continued whining. Pardon me for this, everybody.
Yep, that's fine. I also have a 5-month-old puppy, and she's doing really great. Like, she hasn't had an accident in forever, but if she heads to the door, I may have to pause to leave quickly to run out and let her out. I am still within earshot. I just won't be on camera if I do need to run to let puppy out. She's sleeping contently right now, but yes.
Thanks for that. So my journey's been I'm what would now be known as a crossover trainer. That wasn't language, at least that I was aware of back in the day. Unfortunately, I was copying things I saw on TV, and then I found myself in a position where, even though I had known better, I was doing some better, but I still wasn't undoing some of the behaviors. And I found myself with a television show, and um, it's just on there that I wish I hadn't done. And I made a commitment when we got the second season to do everything I could to demonstrate what growth looked like for a trainer. And to the extent that the network was receptive to that, there were changes, and I got support from a lot of people within the industry that I was relying on a daily basis so that I could carry a different message. But television is television, and they don't really care that much about how a trainer is learning. They just care about what ratings are. And so I've been given a unique opportunity to receive support in this profession from people who want to help me utilize this privileged platform that I've been given to actually maintain. I guess one of the strengths that I bring to any dog person relationship is that I'm in no position to judge. That's how I try to arrive at things. And so it was revelatory for me along the way to hear, well, what do you want the dog to do? What happens if you focus on what you do want rather than what you don't want? Well, there's a very clear, for me, behavioral and emotional shift. There's also space for curiosity and patience and processing. And frankly, it's a whole lot easier to operate from that place, in my experience, and to work with the dogs that I work with. And so I wish I hadn't been so hard-headed and ego-centered, because it just, my world, and certainly the dog's worlds, just got a lot easier. I began to focus on what I did want, particularly because I do a lot of free shaping and capturing. What is the dog already doing that it's interested in, or that it responds to? How can I support it that way? Also, for context for anybody that's viewing this, I'm not a service dog trainer. I don't pretend to be a service dog trainer. I get a number of people that will reach out to me saying about themselves that they have a service dog and can I help them? And I always have that caveat up front. I would rather that they go to someone who's an expert in that from a humane perspective, because as you all know, there are a lot of service dog trainers that have found ways to make dogs do things that is really troubling. What I do find people come to me with service dogs, and I am clear that I am not offering that level of expertise, but they want to know things like, how do I help my dog be more relaxed? I can help you with that, or at least I can explore that. How do I help my dog feel happier? Well, I can't engage the dog's emotions specifically, but I can get a good sense by body language of how a dog feels about something. And I shared with Penny a really amazing conversation I had. There's a Netflix documentary called "To Be of Service," which a friend of mine put together, and it focused on the impact of service dog trainers, and in this case, for veterans. And I got a chance to meet one of the veterans that was featured in the documentary and have a conversation with him. And he was talking about his new life, and has a girlfriend now, and his girlfriend has a dog, and his dog loves his girlfriend's dog. And I just thought, from a dog wellness standpoint, that that was a fascinating insight, because my typical take from the service dog world is that would be a big no-no to have a working dog engage like a normal dog with another civilian dog would be a big no-no. And I asked this gentleman, Greg was his name, Greg, would you say your service dog is showing up better for you as a service dog now that it has a dog friend to play with? And he said 100%. And like the bulb clicked for me. Of course, I mean, of course, but I hadn't asked that in the service dog context before. And it got me thinking about what the dogs need and how crippling it is that the general messaging is that your dog actually should not be allowed to be a dog in order to serve humans. There's obviously a lot to unpack there, hence this group. So that's a bunch of things. It's a long introduction, Penny, and I'll stop right there because I don't want to derail us, but that's how I arrived in this opportunity to speak here with all of you and with Penny, because I got to connect through Andrew Hale's work and just continuing my growth and trying to be as transparent as I can along the way. So at least somebody else who needs help, who's struggling, knows that they're not alone in it. Thanks, Penny.
I know, and I think that's totally perfect, because that leads into a key points of what our Crazy to Calm Working Paws group is all about. There are so many people out there that don't think service dogs have their own individualized needs. They think they're robots. They think they do exactly what was expected of them in every given moment of the day. And no dog can live up to that high of a standard. No human can't. Our kids sure don't. If you're a mother of kids, I raised 5, all adults now, all wonderful, all with their own unique quirks and problems and issues, just like we all have, because nobody's perfect. And the thought that some people will hold a service dog to that standard is just mind blowing when you really think about it. And trying to have some of those bigger questions discussed in a way that allows people to really think about it is the whole purpose of our service dog handler chats. So we do know one of the things that came about early on in our handler chats is that there's no one perfect right way to train a service dog. Um, as you would know, Matt, from a family dog, there's no one right way. That all dogs need to be trained this way. They're not all going to be receptive to the exact same training plan or exact same motivation or exact same environments. It's not a one size fits all thing. So we need to really keep that in the back of our minds, especially when we're working with a young dog and training a new service dog, which many of the people in our group are, is that if we're not looking out for the individual needs of that dog, then what are we giving the dog back to thank them for the dedicated service they're giving us? And not so much of even a thank you, but it has to be a give and take. You know, if we have to have a teamwork based approach. And if we don't, I mean, you've probably heard the horror stories. I know I've heard the horror stories. There isn't anyone in our group very long that's actually struggled through this, but um, you know, there are certain owner trainers, and I used to be, so I'm not pointing a finger because those used to be me too. But it's super easy to get caught up in this is what my dog needs. I'm going to train these things. They need to do this, 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 and I'm going to train this. And when you get caught and stuck on that, just like Andy Hale says, you get stuck in that task-brained mode and you can't make progress the way you want because you're too focused on the task and not what does the dog need in this moment, in this environment. So let's kind of work through our plan of working backwards.
Yeah.
Just starting with what do what do we want our dog to do? And I know kind of pre-meeting we were chatting a little bit about our dogs having the ability to leave food. So if nobody else has a suggestion, we can go on that topic. But if somebody wants to throw out additional behavior, excuse me, I'm going to cough, of something they want their dog when it's a fully trained service dog to do, throw out that behavior. You can either raise your hand or type it in the chat, whatever you want. I know ignoring food is a big one for me, and my take on that is totally different than what the average person does. So that could open a whole can of worms. Cindy, do you have a different one?
Well, the only other one, because I've seen this happen a lot, not just with dogs I've trained, but with and my clients, but with other trainers, and demand barking can be a huge problem, especially in the service dog world, because if our dogs are barking in public, we can be asked to leave. And I have my own strategy on how I deal with it and what I suggest my students do.
Well, that's a great topic. That's actually one that is really fresh on my brain right now because even long before Belle came to me, her breeder was telling me that she had developed anytime somebody entered the room, she would bark. And they knew her by name already. She was picked out for me, so they were using the name I gave her. And they would just say, "Hold on, Belle, we'll be there in a minute." And she would just stop barking and wait. But I mean, so very early on, at like 4 weeks, she had developed a predisposition to barking. And I knew this when she came into my home. And she is always, as she goes through her adolescent stages, barking is going to be the most challenging thing that I have to address. So if we look at that as our need to have a dog that can be quiet in certain situations, let's work backwards through that. If we need our dog to be quiet, how do we get from where they are now, where they're, say, demand barking, or to define that a little bit, where they're barking to tell us that they have a need. That's what demand barking is. They have a need that they want met. So, Matt, do you want to kind of start us rolling with if they're barking to meet a need, what should we do?
Yeah, I want to answer this with from 2 points. And when you're talking about the needs, you familiar with the Gottman's work, Dr. and Mrs. Gottman?
Only a little bit.
So I was introduced to them recently, I think with a conversation with Andy Hale about emotional bids. And I'm just going to give a quick touch on that as a precursor to what my clients would typically consider demand barking. Dr. and Mrs. Gottman, Gottman, they've been studying at the Gottman Institute for, I think, 2.5 decades, human relationships. And what they have identified that in a human relationship, there is something called an emotional bid, wherein one human will make a bid for connection with another human. Now, the bid could be as simple as I'm at the grocery store and I say to the person behind me, look at that sunset. Or the bid could be I'm at home with a family member or a loved one and I reach out and put my I was going to say my hand out on the other person's hand. So whatever the motive is, the bid is generally it's an action taken towards connection. The Gottmans identified that there are three responses that are predictable in humans when an emotional bid is made. One is to turn towards the bid. It's a beautiful sunset. You're right. Or hand, paw, or dog comes over to lean on me and I make contact with the dog. Turn towards the bid. That is the action that most predictably strengthens the relationship. To turn against the bid, why are you barking? Why are you so close to me? Give me space. Why are you talking to me? I don't care about the sunset. To turn against the bid is going to create conflict. But the turning away from the bid is the response to an emotional bid that will most consistently predict a fracture and ultimately the end of trust in the relationship. So I will work back all the way from, and Cindy, your question specific. So appreciate you just bearing with me as I set up where I'm thinking about this from. A client comes to me and is saying that the dog is demand barking. What I go to is, if this is an expression of an unmet need, what other unmet needs might be happening, or what other bids might be being turned away from in the home, that when and if this dog arrives in this moment, the dog is bringing an extra level of frustration to that experience and is less apt to be able to respond in the way that we might want to from a training standpoint, because there's something extra behind it. So that's my first thought. And then specific to the barking itself, from a free shaping standpoint, my inclination in a number of cases is to actually try and mark and shape the space in between the bark, or a shift in the tone of the bark, or a shift in the body language. My shepherd, we had a shepherd who was with us for years who just passed. There's different tones, obviously, in the barking. And so I could tell where she was at in her stress level based on the tone of the bark. So if you're letting me know something because you're a German Shepherd and that's how you're wired, great. I can still catch and praise the space in between the barks. I can still catch and praise a breath that you take, or a step that you take backwards, or a shift in your tone of barking, so that I'm by approximation beginning to shape a different experience for you while you are still doing what you're wired to do and you're feeling heard. Those are my two general thoughts right out of the gate around something like this.
I love the way that you explained that, and I can share a story that a lot of my people would know some background for. So last year, yeah, it was last year already. Last spring, I took in Roz, a golden retriever puppy, young adolescent, about 18 months old, that was had been in training her whole life to be a service dog, and it just wasn't working out where she was at, and people wanted to rehome her. So she came to me to finish up some training and move on. Well, one of the biggest challenges that her first home had was what they called demand barking. She didn't bark a single time in my house for the first, I don't know, I'd say a good 6 months, unless it was an excited barking playing with my other dog, which I totally don't have a problem with, and even that did not last long. That lasted because she didn't know how to not play. She had had so little exposure to other dogs and she was so social that all she wanted to do was play. So in her excitement, she would bark, 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 because she was so overexcited. But she quickly learned that barking or no barking, she still got to play. And the barking stopped with the play. And so one of the other things, some backstory, she lived in an area that was an apartment, college, not campus, but college community. So lots of distractions all the time, apartment living. And she moved to my rural environment where we had a fairly large fenced backyard, lots of nature to get out and explore, and lots of downtime to be a dog. And so in that shift, the reason that we saw no barking from her was because her needs were being met on a daily basis. She was getting time to run. She was never allowed off leash where she was at before, which I totally get and I understand. It's harder in the more urban environments. But for an adolescent that was only getting, like, she was getting 3 or 4 walks a day, but they were short 20-minute, let's go potty walks. And she had learned not to potty until she absolutely had to, because as soon as she did, the walk ended. And so she had to relearn with me, go potty as soon as you go out, because we're going to play games as soon as you go potty. A shift, a total shift. But the majority of her not barking switched over to her needs being met. And then those that know Roz know that she went from me to another temporary home, which we hoped would be her end home. But again, her needs weren't being met due to some sickness that wasn't expected and whatnot, not really what was anticipated, but her needs weren't being met. And the demand barking came right back. And again, apartment living and not enough time enjoying nature and not enough time doing doggy things and expected to be perfect all the time and needs not being met. And all of her problems as far as like demand barking and counter surfing were her 2 major complaints, and they simply were not being met. Well, she came back to me after that for just a short time before she went to her now final home. They swear she is never leaving. But again, they're able to meet her needs. The big difference being that I could see a need present before the dog felt the need to bark. So like you were saying, she was reaching out in so many different ways, asking for stuff, but nobody else was picking up on this. Hence, the barking would start, because that's our dog's way of yelling, screaming, saying, I can't, I need when they get loud like that. And if we can learn to pay attention to the quieter whispers and meet the needs earlier on, we can then redirect a lot of those things that people deem negative behaviors before they need to happen. So I didn't do any training with her on barking at all. I did a little bit of training with like tossing some kibble her way when we first started Zooms, because that was something like she was totally not used to. And I do a lot of Zooms, so she had to get used to it, right? So, but that's the only training I ever did with working on her to be quiet. The rest of it was all needs based, and she learned that she didn't need to bark to get her needs met. On the downside, or on the plus side, she had this quietest little whisper kind of oof, and that was like her play, and that was her invite. If she wanted to play, she could do it to a person or a dog, but she'd walk up and just do the sweetest little boof. It was really cute. But my dog, Azul, who has never been a barker ever in his life, learned how to do that same whisper too. So if their needs were not being met and you heard the little boof, it's like, oh, it's time to play something. Or at least give them opportunity to go play with each other in the backyard or something to that extent. And I'm pleased to say that in her new house, they don't even hear the boof because her needs are being so thoroughly met, which is great. They have another young dog for her to play with all the time. They have outdoor space, and she's never off leash again, but they have nature to explore, and her social needs are being met as well. So I think to me, that is the biggest thing when it comes to choosing a dog to be a service dog, is what doggy needs are going to most be things that you're willing to give. So for me, like, I needed a hiking buddy. So a dog that loves to hike and actually will demand to hike, if you will, because Azul will definitely demand to hike. And he kind of struggled a little bit this winter when I was injured and it was slippery ice and having a young puppy that I couldn't really leave a whole lot. And his hikes were getting left out, you know. We did a lot of other things, and thankfully I built in a lot of other loves for him, like scent work and fun stuff that he does love to do. So if we can't hike, but he literally will tell me if we've gone 3 or 4 days without a hike because he needs it and he knows that I need it. And I wanted that. So I think that's one of the biggest things we can do early on, is finding the dogs that are going to be predispositioned to having the needs that we enjoy meeting. You know, breeds aren't everything, as you know, but sometimes that little bit is a huge step in the right direction from the start. Go ahead, Matt.
I was hearing it too, Penny, and I was thinking about reasonable expectations. And I think that from a dog's perspective, what we're seeing behaviorally is an epidemic of unmet needs. And from a dog training industry, multi-billion-dollar dog care industry, whose primary motive is profit, make no mistake, if they can do well and make money, great, but profit's the primary motive. The messaging is just fraught with unreasonable expectations that are being put on dog people and their dogs, and we're not even getting into the almost lack of messaging for people with disabilities or service needs. So there's very little that actually models what you just said. And it's helpful for me. One of my mentors, actually out of the dog training world, somebody that just helped me a lot along the way personally, he said, Matt, when you're trying to make a decision about something, and I offer this to my clients a lot, there's a 3-step approach. I will say to my clients who are facing challenging behavior issues, challenging for them, the dog's feeling challenged, but challenging for the humans mostly. I'll say to my clients, what's the amount of time that you would least want to spend working on this in order to see change? That's ideal for most people. Whether or not they'll admit to that, that's ideal for most people. The second question is, what's the amount of time that you're willing to spend? And the third question is, what is the amount of time that you are going to resent? And if they name that, then I know we're staying away from the amount of time that you're going to resent. And my pocket to help them is between the least amount of time you want to spend and the time that you're willing to spend. And then that kind of creates a learning arc and more reasonable expectations. Takes a lot of pressure off, is the feedback I'm getting from my clients.
I totally get that one as well. Case in point, I had a client she's my Friday client, so it's been a couple days. I've had the days off in between. But so one of my last clients, and every single time she comes in, I say, so what have you been practicing? And I get not much, we're simply too busy. And that's totally common. And I get it. We all have busy lives. And so my goal when I hear something like that is to always figure out a way to make the dog training that I want to see happen become a normal part of their life, that they don't even realize they're doing it, that it's so simple and so easy, that because we can get hung up on, all right, I have 30 minutes to train the dog. This is it. I have 30 minutes. What's my list that could be, 300 items long of things that I need to train in the next 30 minutes, or what is my 2 or 3 top items I want to train in the next 30 minutes. We get so hung up on that we often then lose sight of training happens whether we're trying to train or not. And that's one of the biggest ones for me, is that training happens naturally all day. So this client that doesn't have time to train, Her dog goes to work with her. After work, they take a nice long walk. Her dog's with her all evening. Her dog sleeps with her, you know, pretty much. So her dog is with her. So if her dog is with her, she's training even if she doesn't think she's training. And that is what, anytime our dogs are with her, we're doing some type of training. And so my mission is always, let's help figure out a way that training it feels so natural and easy to you that you don't realize you're doing it. It just happens. Like Cindy mentioned earlier, the fact that she tosses food at her dog. I'm sure she doesn't hardly think about that anymore because, and I mean, she was one of the original starters of this group, one of our canine coaches. So we've seen her progress that she's made with Nick and how she used to actually have to consciously stop what she was doing to toss that food. And now she doesn't have to do that. If the food toss is needed, she sees it, she does it without even consciously thinking about it because she's gotten so used to doing it. And I see you unmuted, Cindy, so go ahead.
I was just gonna say I have Poe staring at me because she wants food right now because she knows I'm on a Zoom. And to her, Zoom, mom sitting at the computer, equals kibble will be tossed and I will whine until I get it. Because whereas I had just thrown her some food and she just cleaned it up, Nick is still on the couch, sound asleep. And this all started because of Nick. And there goes more food. And they're getting kibbles.
Yeah, sometimes it starts with one dog and it branches to all the other dogs in the house. And I think that is not to circle all the way back to where we started with talking about the other dog that Matt shared with us that is now doing much better at service dog work since they have a doggy friend. We know that dogs are social creatures, and if we can meet their social needs, not every dog wants a doggy friend, but some dogs do, and some dogs definitely need that. And when they do have a doggy friend, that's whether it's a live-in or one that they see regularly, you can't train one and not the other. I get asked all the time, why am I considering Belle a service dog in training when Azul's already a service dog? Is Azul planning on retiring early? He's not quite 4 yet. I'm like, well, no, he's not. But why would I have a dog in my house that I'm not giving the same training standards to and expecting the same level of training from the dogs I already have in my house? I want them to have the same training. Are they at the same place right now? No, because there's a 4-year-old and a 5-month-old. They're not at the same place, but I eventually want her to get to the same place that he's at. So I got to start her the same way he started as a puppy, with some adjustment to mistakes I made along the way, because even with Belle, I'm going to make mistakes along the way because we're human and we're not perfect. So, I think that is a huge part of it, is that if we look at that time that we can spend with our dog and figure out how life fits into that time, not where can we find in our life where we have time to train our dog, but where in life is there the perfect opportunity already to do something? And I think that is really, really big. I know another one of the big things that we wanted to look at, and if we go back to the demand barking idea and the unmet needs, is environments. And so it's huge in the service dog world for people to accidentally rush their dog from one training environment to another training environment and expect too much of their dogs. Definitely fingers pointing back at me being guilty of having done that before. So not accusing anybody, but the whole thing of environments and teaching our dogs to process the environments is something that gets drastically overlooked. And I think that's kind of really important when we're looking at meeting the dog's needs, is the environment picture. Have we given them the time they need in that environment to process that environment before we have our huge expectations? Our dogs, call it fortunately, unfortunately, depending on which way you're looking at it, but they very rarely get to choose the environment we place them in. They're in a people world, and we place them in the environments that we choose. And so if they're not getting to choose that environment, what are we doing to help support them in the environments we're placing them in? And I think that is a big one when we're looking at both the human need to get that training done in a certain time frame and the dog need of making sure their needs are met both as a dog and as a working dog. I think environments and looking at the environment for that is huge. So do you want to look at, like, from the barking perspective, how environments are going to play a role in that, and maybe some things that we can do to help our dogs be more successful in environments?
Yeah, thanks. My mind, as you were talking, my mind is flashing to a lot of people, but one client I worked with. Hey, I've got to take a trip, intercontinental trip on an airplane. Can you help my dog get comfortable at the airport? Okay, I can work with that. What's your timeline? I got a month. Yeah, your reaction right there, Penny, was I thankfully I was on the phone. Um, that's when I'm glad most of my consults, are on the phones, the initial consults. So talk about unreasonable expectations, and then only to find that the dog actually had to be comfortable, had to fly 18 hours, a whole bunch of other things that were just totally unreasonable. But more specifically, or maybe more generally, I was just, as you were describing the dogs not choosing environments, I don't think I've never said it that way, and that's really impactful. I have an emotional response to that, because if I almost never had an opportunity to choose the environments that I was in and didn't have the agency in those environments to opt out or to seek some kind of enrichment or decompression activity, um, I would feel captive at best and probably miserable and cancerous at worst. And so, what a painful experience that is for a dog. One of my participants in the Do Dog Life Differently course said about her dog as she began to make some changes. She said, I realized that for my dog to be heard is to be loved. And I thought that was such a beautiful and accurate representation, not only of what's possible, but actually what's necessary in that human dog relationship. So, environmentally speaking, I use my shepherd again as an example. So I know Mama Hess was her name. I know, Mama Hess, that you're going to be acutely aware of changes in the environment, as my terrier would, as as a number of dogs, but some more so than others, some less than others. Movement, sight, sound. My overarching question is, how can I help take the pressure off you? How can I help take the pressure off you? I met literally and figuratively, I lean very heavily on Suzanne Clothier's thinking about treat and retreat and how to help dogs go away from pressure. And I think the demand barking actually fits in that realm too. If the barking is, the difference between this is what I'm wired to do, and I'm letting you, human, know that there's important information to be had here, versus I have a lot of feelings about what's happening that are stacked up and I can't go away because I'm a shepherd. I want to find ways to help you go away from the pressure. So, in any given environment, and I have learned about myself that I'm like every dog person I know, frankly, every dog pro I know, I am a trauma survivor. So I have learned that I have been trying to navigate environments from a place of how do I not get hurt, which is kind of similar to how how am I safe? And I really appreciate what Andrew Hale says. Your dog can be safe, but not feel safe. That resonated a lot with me. So for many years, my approach in an environment was, how do I have my back to the wall so that I can see everything that's going to happen? That may or may not work for my dog. If I'm at a common one that comes up with my clients as well, I take my dog to a coffee shop. Okay, so tell me about the coffee shop. What's the layout of the coffee shop? Is there an outdoor space? Do you have easy access out? Can your dog feel protected by a barrier? Are you going to get blindsided by a bicyclist going by? So when I go into environments after a lot of after a lot of good support and learning that I've had along the way, I have now recognized that my reflexive need to feel safe in the environment is often a good place for me to think about what's happening for my dog. And I gauge every environment reflexively with that mindset. What is going to feel more or less pressuring for you? How do I help take the pressure off? Maybe you're on my right side. Maybe I'm positioned this way. Maybe I provide these decompression or enrichment opportunities. Maybe we're limiting our time because I have enough of an understanding about your body language, as was the case with my Korean Jindo. I heard Ken McCourt say once, sometimes the sign is there is no sign. And all of a sudden, I realized that's my Jindo. I've been missing it all this time. And he's not going to be as obvious in his stress signals. So my first thought in the environment is, what is the physical positioning that's going to give us an opt-out, allow for my dog to engage if it wants to, and is going to predict the least amount of pressure? First thing I'm asking myself. And then I have to read my dog enough to see how my dog feels about my choice. And I have to be willing, and this is different because I don't rely on my dogs from a service standpoint. I'll just say about myself generally, and I encourage with my clients, I have to be willing to not get what I want, which is different than what I need. What I want is to sit at a cafe or in a park and be able to have my dog with me. But what I need is to have a relationship with my dog where my dog feels supported so that I can feel supported. And that may be a larger picture answer to your question, Penny, but that's generally how I go into it. And then I use my education and things I've learned along the way, literally and figuratively, like a treat and retreat, so that I can keep taking pressure off and we can see if we've got some traction or resilience to be had there.
That is exactly one of the lessons that I had to learn the hard way. With my first service dog, it was all very much she had access to be with me. She met the description of a service dog, so she could go with me anywhere legally. And so I had the right to have her there, so she was there. And I had to really take a step back and look at, okay, she is still fairly new to this, to being a service dog. And I had to consider exactly what you said. What is going to be in this environment? Is she going to excel in this environment? Is she going to need a little bit of extra encouragement? Is she going to need a little bit of a shorter leash, a little bit of a longer leash? Where is our exit? And you hit the nail on the head when you said you had to be willing to give up something that you wanted if your dog needed you to. That's what I tell all of my clients when they start public access training, going into places that maybe are not for pet places. You have to do this going into any place, even outside at the local park. But having that ability to, all right, this is my objective for the day. We have 30 minutes in our time frame. I need to run into the store and get A, B, C, or D. But if it's not happening, it's not happening, and you need to have a backup plan. Well, how can you accomplish A, B, C, or D if your dog cannot do it? Because if you're a team, if you're truly creating a team with your working partner, service dog or service dog in training, you can't just force them to stay in an environment to meet your needs. And so one of my key things is, we get asked a lot, when is your dog old enough to, say, go join you at a medical appointment? Well, first is there isn't an age. It depends on dog. It depends on their comfort level. It depends on previous experience. I got really, really lucky when Azul was a puppy and that I had to go in once a month for a B12 shot. So it was literally a 5 minute or less appointment. I would walk in, it'd take us 2 minutes to get from the car to where I needed to go. I'd check in, and within 3 minutes, I had shot in my arm and I was walking back out. So really, really quick and easy. In that type of situation, he was able to heavily practice that type of environment without all the stress. Whereas if I had tried, I think he was maybe 7 months old the first time he went with me, maybe only even 6 months old, because it was an in and out. And at any given time, if we only got halfway in and it wasn't working, I could always take him back out to the car and go get my shot the next day if I needed to, or, the next hour or whatever. So I could do it without him if he was struggling. It wasn't I had to be there. And so I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make is that, well, if our dog can be in this environment, then even though I can't commit to being able to walk out and leave any moment, I'm still taking my dog that's never done any training in this environment. Like you had said with that 18-hour flight, and only a month to prepare for an 18-hour flight and how unrealistic that is. And I think most of us would say, yeah, that's pretty unrealistic. We have one of our people in our core group right now is actually in Egypt, or maybe headed home, but I think she's still there, having taken her service dog there with her, and she's been preparing that dog for 2 years to be able to make that international flight. So, she did it the right way, and she did some locally, closer, shorter flights leading up to it to make sure the dog was prepared. She taught the dog how to potty in tight spaces using pee pads if need be, because it wasn't going to be able to get off a plane, things like that. So, I mean, she built up to it like we all should. And we need to remember to do that with any environment that we're taking our dog in. But yeah, so my number one, if I can get that point across to any of my clients, is if you've never taken your dog in a specific environment before, make sure you do it when you're free to leave if you need to. I would not take my dog into a place. This was a common question a couple of days ago in one of the groups was, do you take your dog when you go to get x-rays? Safe, unsafe kind of opinions on it. Legally, they can be there if a parent can sit there with a child, the service dog can be there as well. But that whole kind of debate, and it's like, well, I would not have taken Ozwul at 6 months old to something like that I could not leave him with, leave if I needed to. Now, by the time he was 18 months old, it was old hat, and I knew he was going to be comfortable and I knew he was going to be fine, and it was no problem. And I mean, he's been in several different situations where I've had a test where I couldn't get out and leave. But that's because he's an adult and we built up to it. Like being stuck on an airplane. There's nothing like being stuck on an airplane and the inability to leave to make anybody, human or animal of any sort, freak out. So I think giving that agency back to the dog so that they do know they have the ability to tell us, I'm uncomfortable in this environment, can we please leave, is crucial, in my opinion. So if they learn anything, is when you're doing anything new for the first time, be willing to leave. Maybe if you've done it 10 times, if something unexpected might happen, we always have to be prepared for that unexpected thing. And to this day, I mean, I could count on my hand all the times I've had to walk away from a grocery store trip, which is few and far between, but it's still happened where there's times where I haven't been able to do the grocery shopping I intended to do that day because my dog needed it. One big case in point is Azul is highly susceptible to any dog wearing a shock collar. Like he can hear it, even if he's not being shocked. He can hear the radio transmission from remote to collar. And that's about the only thing that will shut him down when he can hear that. And one day we went to go grocery shopping, and there was a dog in a vehicle wearing a bark collar. And this dog was totally out of their mind, scared to death. So people, it was a busy Saturday even. So parking lot filled, people walking by nonstop. The dog would bark, get shocked. 30 seconds later, another person was walking by, bark again, get shocked. Repetitive cycle. I felt bad for the dog. I probably would have called the police on that dog, but because it shut Azul down so drastically bad, we decided like our best bet was to leave. And I felt bad for the dog, and the owners definitely were not kind in any way, shape, or form to think that that was appropriate to do. But I couldn't subject my dog to staying in the parking lot long enough to wait for the police to go. My dog, who was rock solid, has always been rock solid in environments, actually was diving under the vehicles, the parked vehicles in the parking lot to try to escape because he could not see where this bark was coming from. And he's totally great at ignoring barking dogs, but not a dog that every 30 seconds is barking and getting shocked and barking and getting shocked with no owner anywhere around in sight. So there's just going to be those things that we can't predict. And no matter what, we have to be willing to just pack up and say, well, we're not doing this today. And how can we get our needs met then to get groceries? Well, I had it easy. We went back the next day and did our grocery shopping. Wasn't the end of the world. You know, we had enough food for a day. I could have chose a different grocery store. I had a lot of different ways to make sure that need was met without subjecting me or my dog to additional issues because of that very triggering event before we even got in the door.
Part of what you were sharing too, Penny, reminds me that anymore I invest pretty heavily in the beginning of building a dog relationship or a training relationship in reinforcing what the dog's no is. Whatever, if that dog tells me in some way it's not comfortable or it doesn't want to engage, I will reinforce that. Like, to me, that is gold. Thank you for telling me you're not comfortable with that. That's a different level of trust than I learned, coming up, where it was about getting dogs to do things so I could get what I wanted or what I thought I needed. And I often say to people I work with, that dogs are almost resilient to a fault. I've worked in a number of situations with dogs. So I have an example of a dog that we fostered for a few years after the family just decided they were just going to let the dog go. So I can hear by the change in the tone of my voice that I still have some judgment about that. Nonetheless, we took this dog in for foster, and we provided just a lot of unmet, a lot of opportunities to get needs met. And I brought the dog to the vet's office where the family had been taking the dog. And I knew that this dog had a bite history, in part because the dog had tried to bite me the first time that I'd met the dog. And we got to the vet's office, and we were following all of the protocols and called ahead of time and went to the side room, and the dog Arrow was muzzled. And a number of the people on the staff said to me, they said of themselves, I didn't recognize this dog because she's so much more comfortable here. Now, what was astonishing to me is we'd never done any work in a vet's office, but there were enough other needs that had been met and enough trust that was built by me trying in my own like awkward human way to try and see what are your no's and how can I respect that, and let's just start there, and thank you, like, thanks for telling me you're not comfortable with that. There was enough that had been built in that by the time she got to an environment where the entire staff knew was going to be triggering for her, the behavior had changed. And I don't have I've seen that kind of thing happen, that generalization, for lack of a better word. To me, it's a phenomenon. I don't have And you are maybe on the line, or a certain opinion. I'm curious about your thoughts, how that could be explained. I just know that anecdotally, I've seen it happen so many times that it suggests to me, from a dog standpoint, back to how resilient they're resilient to a fault, that if we just, even if we just find a few ways to support them, they can do things that we might never have thought were possible, that we didn't even necessarily need to train. So I lean heavily for the modern day dog on, what don't you like? What does your no look like? And how can we build an experience with respect to that?
That puts me back into the choice and agency discussion we were having. You know, same as you, I want to learn my dog signals. Any dog that's in my care, my clients' dogs, I want to learn not only their explosive I need now signals, those are easy. I want to learn their quiet whispers of need, because I want them to continue to express those needs and get those needs met in a way that allows us to make better progress in whatever we're trying to do. And a lot of that boils down to choice. So, and then choice impacts agency, of course, choice being the ability to choose between two options, stay or leave. Agency is all based on perception of your ability to have choice. And so you basically taught that dog that you were listening to him. He had options and they could express themselves. Even though you hadn't worked in that environment, they felt that they would be listened to, versus they had probably never felt that before. And I see that a lot coming from like my background of working with rescued German Shepherds, and that was huge, to give dogs that had never had any choice ever in their lives, to get them to a point to where they felt like they actually had choice and agency. um, just made such a huge difference. And so that is what I try to get um, through my dog's brains at a very early age. My dog's personal dogs, Azul and Belle, and then also my clients' dogs. I try to teach clients how to, we may not be able to build in all choices, but all dogs need to have some choices. And I have a great example of a time when I couldn't do what the dog was asking to do. Because so Azul, his whole life, from he came to me at 6 weeks old. We've done all of this teamwork and built up agency, choice, agency, and he doesn't ask often, but he has been not feeling the best, didn't know exactly what it was. um I had a lot of people telling me he's showing some reactive behaviors, or not even, it's not the I want to kill you behaviors, but the just get out of my face and leave me alone behaviors. Which is so unlike him. And it boiled down to the fact that he simply didn't feel good. And so the vet has always been a very calm place for him, but a place where he also, like, he has always loved dogs so much and been like over the top, overexcited by other dogs. So it was always a place of high emotion. And with him not feeling good, he really did not want to go into the vet's office. And he had kind of demonstrated that a little bit a few weeks prior, when I had tried to get him to go in with Belle for her appointment. And that point, I was able to give him his choice and put him back in the car. But for this particular one, like, it was getting worse. He didn't have any huge signs of like being sick, other than his grumpiness was getting worse. And so I really needed him to get some blood work done, which thankfully that brought back something, that he was fighting something and needed some antibiotics. But so that one time I had to like force him into the vet. He wasn't happy about it. He was never comfortable. He was stressed out the whole time. But you know what? He forgave me for it. And I know he did because he's feeling better and he's back to where he normally would be. Maybe not all the way, but close. He's still on his antibiotics. And if it hadn't been for giving him a voice and that agency his whole life, he probably would have been an extreme bite risk for the amount of stress he was in the vet's office that day. I have no doubt that any one of a million other of my rescue dogs would have bit somebody that day under that stress. But he didn't show a single sign of any kind of resentment to any human in the building because humans have been nothing but good to him. They've given him the choice. They interacted if he wanted to interact, and they've left him alone when he didn't want to interact. And that's part of my fighting to set that up for him his whole life. But that's the reason I do it, even though he was stressed beyond belief. And it hurt me to have to force him to do it, knowing that he was so stressed. We can have that rational thought of, I know this is what my dog needs in this moment. It was basically a crisis situation, and if he didn't get help, he was going to continue to get worse. He needed that help, right? And so if we build up that agency and choice along the way, when we need to take away that choice, they're more likely to trust us that we know what we're doing. Azul's 73 pounds. When we were at the vet, there's no way I could pick him up and carry him in if I needed to. You know, when Belle went into the vet and she was in her puppy fear stage, I could pick her up and carry her in and then do some counter conditioning and had her happy inside in like 30 seconds. No way could I carry Azul in. I had to get him to work with me or we wouldn't have made it in the door. Like, it wouldn't have. And so as much as he kept telling me, no, Mom, I don't want to go, and I kept saying, but we really need to go, he never got stressed to the point that he had to have a negative reaction. And it was probably the most stressful thing in his life. So it's that building resiliency that you can only get through teamwork and agency, you know, teaching them that their voice will be listened to if at all possible. I think that is probably the most crucial thing. And that's not really the topic that we wanted to discuss, but I think we made a lot of progress in going from a behavior that we want, such as being quiet, backtracking it to making sure or questioning why are they barking in the first place? What needs do they have? Can we meet those needs? And then can we look at what in the environment is causing that stress or that, you know, causing that bark? And is it do we need to leave, or can we manipulate the environment in a way, you know, make subtle changes to make it easier for our dog to be less stressed? And so you want to give us some last minute wrap up for this?
Yeah, thank you. I was actually thinking because I know that our intended jumping off point was to be working backwards, and in a way, I think that even though we spoke very little about that, I think that that's actually what we laid out. Because if I begin working backwards from what I do want and what I do want the dog to be able to experience, then all of the other things that we've talked about are part of that road. They fill in the blanks, and where I start and where I want to end from and work backwards from, um, technically, practically, philosophically, emotionally, the principles are the same. How can I make this the most positive experience for you possible? How can I support you in the best way possible? For me personally and the clients I work with, what do I need to know about myself that I'm going to unintentionally bring into this? What are my biases and prejudices and preconceived notions and agendas and those kinds of things? And that will, the willingness to show up that way will get me to where I want to be. And if I work it backwards, I'm going to need to start the same way that I end. And so, as you know, stating the obvious, that the learning is not linear any more than success, in quotes, because that's a personal experience, but success is not linear either. what I do know is that in the arc of an experience or the arc of a day or in the arc of a lifetime with a dog, if I am operating from those principles of consideration and context and clarity, and if I'm operating from those principles, then they will be interwoven in anything fundamentally that I'm trying to do. If I err, the reason I know that I erred is because I'm out of alignment with what my principles are for this relationship and what my goals are in helping this dog. And for me, it was a breakthrough moment, I think, when somebody identified in me, oh, you're somebody who likes to work backwards. And once they said that, I realized that's exactly what I do. And this is why I do it, because it helps me see the road and it helps me work on the things that are right in front of me, because I'm detail oriented and I'm a big picture kind of person. And that's just how my mind works. So maybe, I don't know, I made a hard pitch for the case that even though I didn't really lean on the topic, maybe we addressed the topic in its own way.
I think we did. Because I'm the opposite. I don't work backwards very well. I can go with where I'm at today and make a plan for going forwards. And I can do that really well and really easily. And most times that plan is right on the mark and where it needs to be. But we all get stuck once in a while. And it's when in that moment when I do get stuck that I have to remind myself to work it backwards. Because if we work it backwards and we consider our needs, our dog's needs, our client's needs, whoever is involved in this picture that has us stuck, if we consider everybody's needs and then look at, is there one small change we can make? What about two small changes? Can we change the environment? Can we change the reinforcement? Can we change our communication in this environment? That clarity. I kept telling Azul when he kept saying we need to leave, I kept saying, I know you want to leave, buddy, but we need to go in. You can do this. Let's walk. Just you're at my side. We're doing it together. And with that clarity and that expectation of, all right, we've trusted each other this far. It's been a 4-year journey. We've always been able to look out for each other. And that's the bigger picture and what we need with our service dog teams. And kind of one of the overarching ones for service dog handler chats to begin with is to go from that task driven, I need a dog that can A, B, C, D, all the way to Z, and maybe running through the alphabet 2 or 3 times. If we can get from that into, we need to be that team that can provide for each other. And by doing that, we end up actually checking off all those things that we need our dog to do for us based on supporting our dog with the support that they need as well. So I think our working backwards today, it really helped me kind of think about better ways to remind myself to work backwards when need be. So I hope it did that for some other people. Does anybody have a question for Matt? I know we went a little bit long. We started a little bit late. So if you have a minute or two, there may be a question. I know Ashlyn had just typed a comment in the chat about how dogs learn from each other. She's got a retiring service dog and a service dog in training right now. And of course, her older dog has helped a lot in teaching her younger dog, which is kind of where, I think Azul's still young enough that he learns from a lot of people and other dogs, but he has definitely helped in training Belle. I think that without Azul, Belle would be an extremely bitey puppy just because she showed some early tendencies to that. But thankfully, I knew how to mitigate that from a training standpoint. And Azul had such a gentle touch with telling her, ouch, that hurt, that they learned really good to communicate without threat, without punishment, without overcorrection. And Belle is not a bitey puppy in the least. So I'm seeing something in chat. It's a thank you. It's been an interesting conversation. So yes, you're welcome, Ryan. I'm not seeing any questions come in though for Matt, so we do just want to thank you for joining. I think this is going to be one that people are going to really enjoy the replay of, and I look forward to seeing some of the comments coming in from it. And so I'll try to really hard to remember to share a few of those with you. Might be a couple of months, but
Fair.
I'll try to send some your way because I think people are really going to enjoy this chat. I know I did.
I did too.